Welcome to Boundless, one of the St. Matthew Lutheran Church podcasts coming to you from beautiful Hawthorne Woods, Illinois. I'm Ed Blonsky, lead pastor of St. Matthew, and we're thrilled to bring you the inspiring messages and sermons from our St. Matthew community right to your ears, wherever you are. Each episode of this podcast features a sermon or message straight from a recent worship service and is packed with wisdom, hope, and practical insights to carry you through the week. Whether you're a longtime member, a curious listener, or someone exploring faith, there's something here for you. All right, let's get to today's message from St. Matthew Lutheran Church. To get comfortable, open your heart, and let's listen together. Hallelujah, Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Hallelujah. We're continuing on in the celebration of Easter. It's not just one Sunday out of the year. It's actually 7 Sundays in a season. And this is the 6th of those. And I'm going to start off by asking you a question. I was very surprised at the answers I was getting in the previous 2 times that I preached this. How many of you have heard of Groucho Marx? Amazing. You know, I was thinking that I might be too old to do that, but even thinking about that, Groucho Marx was way before even my time. The only reason I knew about him was my father was a big fan of early comedy, the Marx Brothers, Abbott and Costello, the road pictures by Bing and Bob, that kind of thing. But it's amazing to me that so many people know of it. So you know about his signature song, Lydia, the Tattooed Lady. Now this message has nothing to do with that, except for the name. Because I've only heard the name Lydia twice, in Groucho Marx's song and in Acts chapter 16. The reading that you heard Pastor Ryan just read to you just a little while ago. And it's interesting how I did a little bit of a study of this. The name Lydia is actually in the top 100 names for girls in the last 10 years. And I'm hoping that it's because of Acts 16 and not Groucho Marx, but that's what I found out about Lydia. In this teaching series, Reactions to the Resurrection, we have been focusing on 4 key themes in these messages. One, that the miracle, the unprecedented miracle of the resurrection of Jesus. 2, it is an event, the resurrection of Jesus had a world-altering impact. 3, the deeply personal connection that the resurrection of Jesus has to each one of us. And for the church, the motivation for mission that the resurrection of Jesus gives to us. And we have talked about how Peter was not afraid to be arrested for preaching on that first message in this series. Then we talked about how there was this encounter with Saul, who later became known as Paul, with the resurrected Jesus, an encounter that changed the world. And then I talked about how Jesus has told us that it is more blessed to give than it is to receive. And our reaction to the resurrection is to give this story away, to tell other people about Jesus. And then last week, Pastor Ryan talked about how we need to get out of God's way, that sometimes we bring limitations to the reaction to the resurrection, that we can only tell other people about Jesus limited by what we ourselves believe and know. And Pastor Ryan told us, get out of God's way, let him do it, just be his voice, his hands, and get out of his way, and so many amazing things can happen. Well, this week, we're going to talk about Lydia of Thyatira. We're told that she was born in the city of Thyatira on the continent of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. And this was actually a major city that was part of an ancient kingdom called Lydia before the Roman Empire came into place. So I assume that she's named after that ancient kingdom. She is now living in the city of Philippi, which is on the European continent. And it is noted in the research that I did that St. Paul came to Philippi. This was the first place he visited that did not have a Jewish synagogue, which is why he goes out to the riverside and finds people. Lydia is a dealer in purple garments, purple cloth, and at that point in time, this is a very lucrative business to be in because purple dye was very expensive. And then we're told that she is a worshiper of God, which is thought to mean that she was a pagan who was now in the process of converting to Judaism. And she was taught over a period of time. The text I was looking at Lenski, who is a commentator of the Greek New Testament. And the way the Greek is worded here, Lenski tells us, is that this conversation that the teachings of Paul to Lydia happened over several sessions, perhaps several days, and then she was baptized. She and her entire household, which for us as Lutheran Christians is a proof text for infant baptism, in that it's not just the adults, because a household can very often mean that there are infants in there as well, and they were all baptized. And then the last line of the reading. She prevailed upon, Luke is writing this, so he uses that first person plural, us, Paul and Luke and the companions that were with them. She prevailed upon us. She wanted to be a part of this, and she was not going to take no for an answer. So I'd like us to take a little bit of a deeper dive into Acts chapter 16. So if you have a Bible, I'd like you to open it up or turn your Bible apps to Acts chapter 16. Acts chapter 16 was just read, but let's look at it one more time, taking a little bit of a more focused look at verses 13, 14, and 15. Acts 16:13 says, "And on the Sabbath day, remember Paul is joined by Luke at this point, so we went outside the gate to the riverside, where we supposed there was a place of prayer, and we sat down and spoke to the women who had come together." So that spoke to the women, that's an indication that this is happening over several days, actually, starting on the Sabbath day. Verse 14, "One who heard us was a woman named Lydia from the city of Thyatira, a seller of purple goods, who was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to pay attention to what was said by Paul. And after she was baptized, and her household as well, she urged us, saying, 'If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay.' And she prevailed upon us." So, looking at this a little bit closer, they're at the riverside, and they're hearing the gospel at the riverside. I'm come to understand, because I've not been there myself, but if you go there to Philippi, the ruins there, the tour guides will take you down to the river. There's a little creek there, and there's a place, it's a prayer garden, essentially, is what it looks like on the pictures. And so you can see the place where they believe that Lydia was baptized. I hope you are enjoying today's message, and we'll get back to it in just a moment. Here at St. Matthew, our mission is to share Christ's boundless love that meets the boundless need of the world, so that we can grow in faith and build a stronger community together with boundless hope. Here at St. Matthew, we are blessed to have an early childhood center for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, as well as a youth and family ministry. To find out more, reach out to our youth and family minister, Brittany Johnson, at our website. Now, let's get back to today's message. And so they're hearing the gospel at the riverside. She's hearing the gospel at the riverside. And this leads me to believe that this is why a lot of churches do this. They go down to the river to baptize people in commemoration of what happened here in Acts chapter 16. I heard about this once when I was a pastor in Wisconsin. The Baptist church in town was going to hold an event at the river. The Rock River goes through Mayville, Wisconsin there. And they were going to have baptisms down at the river. Why they chose March, I don't know, other than probably because Easter was right around that time, the end of March. But they went down in March. They had to cut a hole in the ice in the river. And they did baptize some people. So they made another connection to Acts 16. When those who were baptized came up out of the water, I think they also were purple with cold. But this could be why churches do this. Lydia was taught, as Lenski tells us, over the course of several sessions or perhaps even several days, and then she was baptized. So she was taught and then baptized. This is what our small catechism picks up on as well. The latest edition of Luther's Small Catechism is on page 290, where it talks about this. Jesus inseparably connects baptism and teaching. Those who are able to receive instruction are normally baptized after being taught the main articles of the Christian faith. And then it prompts you to read Acts chapter 2, Acts chapter 8, and Acts chapter 16. And then it says infants and young children should be brought to baptism as soon as possible, and then instructed in the Christian faith as they are able to receive instruction, which is our typical way of doing things here, especially here at St. Matthew. We baptize the infants and small children, and then they go through confirmation instruction in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And so Lydia is taught and then is baptized, but indeed her entire household is baptized. Lydia's reaction to the resurrection then is to prevail upon Paul and Luke and all the others. I want you to come to my house, and I will give you everything you're going to need to provide for yourselves food and lodging and resources so that you can focus completely on proclaiming the resurrected Christ to as many people as possible. And indeed, that's exactly what happens. In her home starts the church at Philippi. We know it today as the Philippian church. And 10 years after this event in Acts 16, Paul writes a letter to the Philippians. And I wanted to look at that real quick with you. It's in chapter 1, Philippians 1 and at verse 3. Where Paul writes to the church at Philippi 10 years after this event. I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you, all making my prayer with joy, because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day, 10 years ago, until now. And I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion in the day of Jesus Christ. Now, it's interesting. There are two interesting facts about Philippians. One, it is the only epistle of Paul in the New Testament where he doesn't provide or give any rebuke or correction or calling out what they're doing wrong. It's only encouragement and praise to God for what they are doing and how they are helping him and the entire Christian church with resources and prayers and providing for pastors and teachers in the church. So that's one of the things that the Philippian church is known for. All because Lydia heard the gospel at the riverside. The second thing in Philippians is that Lydia is not mentioned by name. Now, this is 10 years later, so one of two things could possibly be happening is that Lydia is no longer in Philippi. Maybe she went back home to Thyatira to bring the gospel back to her hometown. Or it's 10 years later, maybe she was an older lady and she has now passed on and is in the church triumphant. But the two interesting things about that church in Philippi, it would become a source for the entire European continent, that this is the first place someone on the European continent is converted and baptized, but it won't be certainly the last. The church and the gospel explode throughout Europe, and we also are benefits of that, because not only does the gospel come to Europe, but then eventually, some 1600 years later, it comes to the Americas, and you and I are a living legacy of that. So what is Lydia's lesson to us? Again, the unprecedented miracle of the resurrection of Jesus. Now, I use that phrase, and it's not as if Jesus is the only resurrection there is. That's certainly not the case. There are resurrections in the Old Testament. Elijah raises a young boy from the dead. His successor, Elisha, raises a young boy from the dead. The bones of Elijah raise a person from the dead. And in the New Testament, Peter raises Tabitha or Dorcas from the dead. Paul will raise someone from the dead as well. And Jesus raises several people from the dead. But the unprecedented miracle of Jesus' resurrection is that there are no human agencies through which God raises the dead, like with Elijah and Elisha and Paul and Peter. Jesus is raised without any intervention by humans. He is simply raised by God the Father for us. This miracle is unique in the world. Because when you think about it, all the other religions of the world have in some way, shape, or form the God of that religion asking the people to die for them, to make some kind of sacrifice for them. Christianity is unique in that it is the only religion in the history of the world where God dies for his people, which is exactly what Jesus did for us, the Son of God. Now, this has a world-altering impact, as we have been talking about. It changes the world. The resurrection of Jesus Christ changes the world, oftentimes through one or two people at a time. Lydia hears the gospel and is baptized, but then her whole household is baptized, and a church is started in Philippi, and that's the first church on the European continent, and now it explodes throughout the Roman Empire and Europe, and eventually into the Americas, and of course around the world. And it's also a deeply personal connection to Lydia. When you think about Lydia, she had everything she could have needed in this world. She was a purveyor or in the business of purple garments and purple cloth. She had wealth. And yet, she is given more, not just worldly wealth, but something far, far more greater. And she's also a believer in God. She is on the path to becoming a religious Jew. And then she hears the gospel, and she's taken to another level of her faith in the one true God. And this becomes then the motivation for mission. The church starts in Lydia's home in Philippi. And then the joy of that resurrection goes all over. And so we also can know that joy as a church, a living legacy of Lydia and all the others who have gone before us. It started by a woman hearing the gospel at the riverside, where she hears the story of the birth of Jesus, the life of Jesus, the death of Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus, and the ascension of Jesus, which changed her life, but in turn, she now helps change the world by supporting, by providing resources and lodging and food, prevailing upon those who would proclaim the gospel. And so now you and I are invited to know that joy and to be a part of that and to prevail upon others in our lives so that they can know the good news about Jesus. That's our reaction to the resurrection. In Jesus' name, amen. I hope you enjoyed listening to today's message. But here's the thing. This podcast isn't just about listening. It's about connecting and spreading the word. We need your help to grow this community and share these messages with others. So let's get interactive. First, if you're moved by what you hear today, take a quick second to rate this podcast on your favorite platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. Those stars really help others discover us. Next, hit that like button or give us a thumbs up. It's a small gesture that makes a big difference. And here's the big one. Share this episode. Text it to a friend, post it on social media, or tell someone about it over coffee. You never know who might need to hear this message today. Want to dive deeper? Visit our website at www.stmatts.net, stmatts.net. You'll find out more about our church, upcoming events, and ways to get involved, whether you're local or joining us from afar. We'd love to connect with you. Thanks for joining us today on Boundless, one of the St. Matthew Lutheran Church podcasts. Don't forget, rate, like, and share this episode to help spread the boundless love. And visit www.stmatts.net for more. And we'll see you next time. Until then, keep the faith and keep connecting.